Oh, hello, great readers. I'm Belchan.
I'm Nimakung.
I'm Van Chan.
In this class, I'll read to all of you a part of Great Expectations.
S.
Ah.
Great Expectations. Charles Dickens. Chapter 26. It fell out as Wimmicat told me it would. Cashier and clerk. My guardian was in his room, washing his hands with his scented soap, when I went into the office from Woolworth, and he called me to him. Wasiv. No ceremony, he stipulated, and no dinner dress. I knew where he lived, and I believe it was in his general objection to make anything like an admission that he replied, "Come here." Washed his clients off, as if he were a surgeon or a dentist. He had a closet in his room, fitted up for the purpose, which smelt of the scented soap like a perfumer's shop. It had an unusually large dark towel on a roller inside the door, and he would wash his hands and wipe them and dry them all over this towel whenever he came in from a police court or dismissed a client from his room. When I and my friends repaired to him at 6 o'clock next day, he seemed to have been engaged on a case of a darker complexion than usual, for we found him with his head butted into this closet, not only washing his hands, but laving his face and gargling his throat. And even when he had done all that, and had gone all round the jack towel, put his coat on, there were some people slinking about as usual when we passed out into the street, who were evidently anxious to speak with him. Presents that they gave it up for that day. As we walked along with George, he was recognised ever and again by some face in the crowd of the streets, and whenever that happened he talked loud to me, but he never otherwise recognised anybody, or took notice that anybody recognised him. He conducted us to Gerrard Street, to a house on the south side of that street, rather a stately house of its kind, but dolefully in want of painting, and with dirty windows. He took out his key and opened the door, and we all went into a stone hall. Bare, gloomy, and little used. The first floor. There were carved garlands on the panelled walls, and as he stood among them giving us welcome, I know what kind of loops I thought they looked like. Dinner was laid in the best of these rooms. The second was his dressing room. The third, his bedroom. He told us that he held the whole house, but rarely used more of it than we saw. The table was comfortably laid in silver in the service. Of cushioned at the side of his chair was a spacious dumbwaiter, with a variety of bottles and decanters on it, and 4 dishes of fruit for dessert. I noticed throughout that he kept everything under his own hand, and distributed everything himself. There was a bookcase in the room. I saw from the backs of the books that they were about evidence, criminal law, criminal biography, trials, acts of parliament, and such things. The furniture was all very solid and good, like his watch chain, It had an official look, however, and there was nothing merely ornamental to be seen. In a corner was a little table of papers with a shaded lamp, so that he seemed to bring the office home with him in that respect too, and to will it out of an evening and full to work. Tugeth stood in the hearthrug, after ringing the bell, and took a searching look at them. To my surprise, he seemed at once to be principally, if not solely, interested in drum. Bit said to you, putting his large hand on my shoulder and moving me to the window. I don't know one from the other. The spider, said I. The botchy. Sprawly. That's Bentley Drummle, I replied, not making the least account of the one with the delicate face. He returned. Bentley Drummle is his name. Is it? He immediately began to talk to Drummle, not at all deterred by his replying in his heavy, reticent way, but apparently led on by it to screw discourse out of him. I was looking at the two, when there came between me and them the housekeeper, with the first dish for the table. She was a woman of about 30, I suppose, but I may have thought her younger than she was. A little, of a lithe, nimble figure, extremely pale, with large faded eyes, and a quantity of streaming hair, parted as if she were panting, and her face to bear a curious expression of suddenness and flutter. But I know that I had been to see Macbeth at the theatre, and I told you before. Oh, like the faces I had seen rise out of the witch's cauldron. She set the dish on, Eddie, and vanished. We took our seats at the round table, and my guardian kept him on one side of him, while Startup sat on the other. It was a noble dish of fish that the housekeeper had put on table, and we had a joint of equally choice mutton afterwards, and then an equally choice bird, sauces, wines, all the accessories we wanted, and all of the best were given out by our host from his dumb waiter. And when they had made the circuit of the table, he always put them back again. Similarly, he dealt us clean plates and knives and forks for each course, and dropped those just into 2 baskets on the ground by his chair. No other attendant than the housekeeper appeared. She sat on every dish, and I always saw in her face a face rising out of the cauldron. Years afterwards, I made a dreadful likeness of that woman, from flowing hair to pass behind a bowl of flaming spirits in a dark room, and just to take particular notice of the housekeeper, both by her own striking appearance and by Wemmick's preparation, my guardian, and that she would remove her hands from it as she put before him, hesitatingly, as if she dreaded his calling her back, and wanted him to speak when she was nigh, if he had anything to say. I can see that I could detect in his manner consciousness of this, and a purpose of always holding her in suspense. Dinner went off gaily, and although my guardian seemed to follow rather than originate subjects, I knew that he wrenched the weakest part of our dispositions out of us. For myself, I found that I was expressing my tendency to lavish expenditure, and to patronize Herbert, and to boast of my great prospects. Before I quite knew that, I had opened my lips. It was so with all of us, but with no one more than Journal. at was screwed out of him before the fish was taken off. It was not then. But when we had got to cheese, that our conversation turned upon our rowing feats. Amphibious way of it is. Drum upon this. Informed our host that he much preferred our room to our company, and that as to skill he was more than our master, and that as to strength he could scatter us like chaff by some invisible agency. My guardian wound him up to pitch so short of ferocity about this rifle, and he fell to braying and spanning his arm to show how muscular it was, and we all fell to braying and spanning our arms in a ridiculous manner. Now the housekeeper was at that time clearing the table. My guardian, taking no heed of her, but with the side of his face turned from her, interest in Drummle, that, to me, was quite inexplicable. Suddenly, he clapped his large hand on the housekeeper's, like a trap, as she stretched it across the table. So suddenly and smartly did he do this, that we all stopped in our foolish contention. If you talk of strength, said Mr. Chivers, I'll show you a wrist. Molly. Her entrapped hand was on the table, but she had already put her other hand behind her waist. Master, she said, in a low voice, with her eyes attentively and entreatingly fixed upon him. I'll show you a wrist, repeated Mr. Chivers, with immovable determination to show it. Molly. Master, she again murmured. Molly, said Mr. Chivers, not looking at her, but obstinately looking at the opposite side of the room. Let them see both your wrists. Show them. He took his hand from hers and turned that wrist up on the table. She brought her other hand from behind her and held the two out side by side. The last wrist was much disfigured, deeply scarred, and scarred across and across. When she held her hands out, she took her eyes from Mr. Chivers and turned them watchfully on every one of the rest of us in succession. There's par here, said Mr. Chivers, clearly tracing out the signs with his forefinger. Very few men have the perverse that this woman has. It's remarkable what mere force of grip there is in these hands. I have had occasion to notice many hands, but I never saw stronger in that respect. Man's or woman's. While he said these words in a leisurely, critical style, she continued to look at every one of us in regular succession as we sat. The moment he ceased, she looked at him again. That'll do, Molly, said Mr. Chivers, giving her a slight nod. You have been admired, and can go. She withdrew her hands and went out of the room, and Mr. Chivers, putting the decanters on from his dumbwaiter, filled his glass and passed round the wine. At 9:30. Gentlemen, said he, we must break up. Pray make the best use of your time. I am glad to see you all. Mr. Drummle. If his object in singling out Drummle were to be mad still more, it perfectly succeeded. In a sulky triumph, Drummle showed his merest appreciation of the rest of us, in a more and more offensive degree, until he became downright intolerable. through all his stages. With it, Shiggis followed him with the same strange interest. He actually seemed to serve as his estimator, Shiggis' wine. In albeit want of discretion, I dare say we took too much to drink. And I know we talked too much. We became particularly hot upon some boorish sneer of drums, to the effect that we were too free with our money. It led to my remarking, with more than discretion, that it came with a bad grace from him. Drum started had lent money in my presence but a week or so before. Well, retorted Drum, I don't mean to imply that he was, said he, but it might make you hold your tongue about us and our money. You should think, retorted Drum. I dare say, I went on, meaning to be very severe. You are right, said Drum. I wouldn't lend one of you a sixpence. Why they mean to borrow under those circumstances? You should say, repeated Drum. His surly obstinacy that I said, disregarding Herbert's efforts to check me. Come, Wister, Doma. Since we are on the subject, I'll tell you what passed between Herbert here and me. I don't want to know what passed between Herbert there and you, growled Drum. And I think he did in a lower growl, that we might both go to the devil and shake ourselves. I'll tell you. However, said I, whether you want to know or not. We said that as you put it in your pocket, very glad to get it. Drum laughed outright, and sat laughing in our faces, with his hands in his pockets and his round shoulders raised, plainly signifying that it was quite true, and that he despised us as this is all. Harry Star came in hand, though with a much better grace than I had shown, and exhorted him to be a little more agreeable. Star upped, being the lively, bright young fellow, and Drum being the exact opposite. The latter was always disposed to resent him as a direct personal affront. He now retorted in a coarse, lumpish way. All laugh, resenting this little success more than anything. Drama, without any threat or warning, pulled his hands out of his pockets, dropped his round shoulders, swore, took up a large glass, and would have flung it at his adversary's head. That purpose. Gentlemen, said Mr. Chagers, deliberately put down the glass, and hauling out his gold repeater by its massive chain. On this we all rose to depart. Before we got to the street door, Startup was surely calling Drum old boy if nothing had happened. But the old boy was so far from responding that he would not even walk Hammersmith on the same side of the way. So Herbert and I, who remained in town, saw them going down the street on opposite sides, Startup leading, and Drum lagging behind in the shadow of the houses, much as he was wont to follow in his boat. As the door was not yet shut, I thought I would leave Herbert there for a moment, and run upstairs again to say a word to my guardian. I found him in his dressing room, surrounded by his stock of boots, already hard at it, washing his hands of us. Anything disagreeable should have occurred, and that I hoped he would not blame me much. Pooh, said he, sluicing his face, and speaking through the water drops. It's nothing. pill? He had turned towards me now, and was shaking his head, and pulling, and toiling himself. I am glad you like him. No, my guarding assent. Don't have too much to do with him. Keep as clear of him as you can. But I like the fellow. He is one of the true sort. Oil. Looking out of the towel. He caught my eye. But I am not a for scintilla, he said, letting his head drop into a festoon of towel, and toiling away at his 2 ears. You know what I am, don't you? Good night. Good night. In about a month after that, the spider's time with Mr. Pocket was up for good. And then, to the great relief of all the house but mice, Pocket, he went home to the family hole. To be continued.